right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. Those of us with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, which is a program of men as peacemakers, we're very excited to be back for our kitchen table conversation series where we are shaping new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. This is our 66th conversation, which is amazing to me. And we're so glad to be together again and to have a special guest here joining us as well. And for all of you who are able to tune in right now as we are live, or if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube or something like that, we're just very glad that you've decided to tune in and join our conversation. So yes, this time, as I mentioned, we're very excited to get going and hear from our fabulous guest star, Seng Xiong. Sang is the Queer Justice Coordinator at Transforming Generations, which is a culturally specific nonprofit for Hmong victims and survivors of gender-based violence, and they are based in the Twin Cities, St. Paul, I believe. So shortly, we will hear from Sang more about how they got involved in this work. And then later we will have a little conversation about Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is coming up and happens every year on November 20th to honor the memory of trans and gender expansive folks whose lives have been lost to anti-transgender hate and violence. So before we get into it, let's introduce ourselves, regulars. So I am Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm in Duluth, Minnesota here at Men as Peacemakers, and I'm just excited to have this conversation. And I will pass it over to Hunter.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Hunter Beckstrom, use he, him, and his pronouns, and I am coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I work at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MNCASA, also very happy to be here with y'all today. And I will pass it over to Sean E.
Hey, I'm Sean Elmquist, the other Sean at Menace Peacemakers. I'm also here in Duluth. He, him are my pronouns, and I'm the campus prevention coordinator here at Menace Peacemakers.
Awesome, and we're very excited to hear more. Sang, we'd love to give you the floor to introduce yourself, and then if you want to just share a little bit about the story of how you got involved doing this work, a little bit about what that means to you, and anything else you want to share with us as an introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, for opening up the space for me to just share a bit. Nyajongwa Gulumbe Seng. Hello, my name is Seng. I use they, them pronouns. I, like Sean said, shared, I am the Queer Justice Coordinator at Transforming Generations. Having been in this role for the past 2 and almost 3 years now. And I can share about a bit my entry point into this work with Transforming Generations, and I think just in general, this work around organizing to end gender-based violence, specifically within the Hmong and Southeast Asian community here. My previous work before I got into this was actually in massage therapy, and it was, I think, the point of which I was starting to really learn how to integrate frameworks of healing with body work, with how to incorporate holistic wellness into that, and draw a lot from my cultural lineage in this. Having done this, I think, when it comes to massage for all my life, that's one of the things I knew what I was good at. And for a long time, I didn't know what I was good at. And as I was reflecting about how I was drawing upon cultural lineage to inform my work as a massage therapist, it was opening up a lot of things in terms of where I learned these skills from, what does it mean to be a caretaker, and when I think about the pillars of support who I drew that from, a lot of times it came from the women in my life, the people who were feminine, who had this undertaking of either having to be caretakers or intuitively knowing, and it may be both. Um, and so I was deeply having those introspections myself, and just um, in turn revisiting a lot of memories about the forms of domestic violence or just gender-based violence I saw in my household, in my family, my community. And quite frankly, massage was getting really tiring. It was hard on my body. I did that for almost 4 years full time. And I was trying to think of in what ways would I still feel to contribute meaningfully in my work around care, in my work around healing. And I thought to community work, community within Hmong spaces, and community that's within alignment about addressing gender-based violence, yes, but also the patriarchy that was prevalent in our community, and that was a space for and by Hmong queer and trans folks, Hmong women, Hmong queer women. And so um, I, on a whim, just happened to see a posting with Transforming Generations, who I had contacted that I've known for years through some of our community interactions, engagements, and I I took my chance. I really pleaded my case to know why I thought I was a fit, and most importantly, just present the sort of values and mission I have when it comes to contributing to just the betterment of our future as Hmong people, as Hmong queer people, that was really aligned in this deconstruction and this disruption and this eradication of patriarchy. And then, you know, in the past couple of years now, I've been able to do some tremendous work to offer healing with our community that also is healing for me, and some really beautiful relationships that have been developed, interactions that have been really reflective of this work that we do here at Transforming Generations, because there's a big population of Hmong people here in Minnesota. And there's also quite a significant population of Hmong LGBTQ folks here. And there is such a dire need for these kind of services, for this kind of work, for people to feel seen, for people to feel like there are those who are looking out for them. Because I know when I was growing up, it wasn't so present. And so I'm really honored to be in a wave, knowing that there are shoulders that I stand upon and I get to work with even to this day that have allowed for me to continue this kind of ripple effect of that we're seeing, these opportunities for folks like who look like us, that are like us, to get more service, some more support, some more care, and really change the trajectory and paradigms of how we think about queer and trans folks in our communities, and value Hmong women, Hmong folks who are in line with taking down patriarchy.
Well, thank you so much for that really great introduction. Well done. And yeah, thank you for sharing part of your story. I had no idea about the massage therapy, and I can imagine that would be very hard on your body after 4 years. But I think it's very interesting. I think the first sort of thought that comes to my mind is I think about Pang Tao, who is usually one of our regulars here, and you know, he was the original sort of founder of the Men and Masculine Folks Network here, and you know, he talks about like how the dynamics and the nuances are so different, you know, when it comes to gender-based violence within our different diverse communities. And so I was thinking, you know, some folks may hear that and think, well, why does there have to be a Hmong or Southeast Asian group? You know, why can't we just have these overarching, like, you know, agencies that help people? And I think, I know I've learned a lot from Peng and from Felix and other folks, that just it looks different in each community, and each community has different needs on how they want to be cared for and supported after experiencing violence. And so I'm just grateful to learn more about your work. And as we usually do, we kind of open things up for our folks here to kind of comment and ask any questions, and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Seng, for just providing a little bit of your own background. What really resonated with me is the importance of like somatic work when we're in community, and trying to do violence prevention as well. And I know that when I first started in this movement, like that was not in the forefront of my mind whatsoever. It wasn't until like the last couple years in which I've like really tried to spend more time like somatically how that has such an impact on ourselves and our broader work and what we do and how we interact within the community. And it just makes me think, like, particularly in trying to engage men and masculine folks, I think sometimes men and masculine folks are much more likely to interact and share and be vulnerable in kind of consensual touch services like massage therapy or barbershops rather than seeing a therapist, because it's kind of that, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of men and masculine folks are more comfortable being vulnerable in like a shoulder to shoulder type of environment rather than like face to face with people. And I think having that like somatic piece and feeling more in community, but not feeling like there's this like huge like push to be vulnerable or to kind of share, I think is really important. So I just wanted to share about that because that's really what resonated with me. So thanks, Seng.
Yeah, I think I appreciate you sharing that. It just was sparking up some thoughts for me that I think we, in my generation, especially, I'm a non-binary person that was raised as a boy, have been in a culture that teaches a lot of boys, a lot of men to not um, not be so in tune with their emotions, and if not anything, not be able to cope with dealing with their emotions and have outlets that allow for being able to convey how they're feeling. And so, having experienced that myself, I was reflecting as you were talking about that, sharing that I learned to internalize so much of my emotions, and it living in my body, weighing me down, not knowing so. And I I would just remember having so many lash outs, and it was not a unique experience. I saw so many men, so many boys in my life who were doing that, and more so allowed the space to do that, just because you know men, boys are just granted that much more space um, to lash out, to display anger, and that is like something considered that's strength. That is the defending energy that is required for being a part of the household, the man, whatever. And um, I'm so blessed to that I also have a mother who really interrogated that with me. Maybe she didn't know she was consciously doing that, but she was providing me models and examples to really question those things. And in those moments that I did lash out, actually consider what harm that I was doing and perpetuating. And being a product of patriarchy myself, what sort of unhealthy pattern that I was contributing to in the long line of our family, our communal history. And so when I now take this back into the work that I do here at Transforming Generations, I think it's so important to offer holistically um, uh, the wheel of how we're providing care to our folks. And when it comes to our victims, survivors, most of whom are women and queer and trans folks that are not male identified, looking at the somatics is super important because we are having to see how trauma has lived in their bodies. What cultural practices do we do that has actually informed our healing, like such as agricultural practices? It's gardening, it's sharing meals together, it is going out to do service, spiritual practices together that require movement. And these are the other, I think, things that we're including in the nuanced ways that we take care of our people, because it goes beyond just like a Western framework of talk therapy that's so oftentimes emphasized, which is, I think it's a great medium to offer care and healing too. And there also has to be some supplemented care as well, especially in line with our lineages, our ancestry, our culture. And the same goes for the men that we provide care for, knowing that we also hold a group called Seng Xiong programming for men who have caused harm in their families or in their communities. And really giving them the opportunity to examine, like, you know, what lives in their bodies from the sort of messages that they carry and have grown up with, and how they use their body as a means to not honor their healing, not honor the folks around them, and not honor themselves too. Because I think patriarchy, not only is it violent to women, to queer and trans folks, but it's actually detrimental to men themselves, that they're having to kill part of their humanities to inflict this sort of violence, and not see what the humanity of other people to be able to do that. And yeah, I think some of those means is like, I think we have to take into consideration that maybe the face-to-face interaction is too much, and there just has to be strategy about how we can go about the other ways that I love that you brought up too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that somatic piece and just like how I feel like it's a fairly new way of thinking about and understanding like how violence and trauma, and even just patriarchy, as you said, like lives within us, and how we carry that, you know, in our homes and neighborhoods, workplaces, all of the places that we go, right? Like it's always impacting us. And you know, I think that term somatics is like sort of out there now, and yet, I mean, I think about for myself, you know, that's very much a challenge for me to like learn, because I feel like we have to almost relearn how to connect with our bodies, and to know like, okay, I'm feeling this tightness in my chest, and why is that coming up for me right now in this moment? And so I just think that's so important, and I'm glad it came up, because, you know, it's like, how do we heal? How do we heal ourselves from the way that patriarchy has impacted us as men and masculine identifying people? And I don't have all the answers for sure. And so I definitely appreciate all of you at this table, and sharing your wisdoms with us as we go and learn together.
I'm struck by the piece about, you know, lashing out and, you know, expressing anger, and like, you know, I sometimes feel like just, yeah, the only appropriate emotion to really show as a male identified person is anger. And as much as I've tried to like I don't know, I certainly try not to lash out, you know, in trying to sort of like understand, like, why am I angry, or maybe there's another emotion that's underneath this, and all that kind of stuff. Like, does this live in my body? Like, how might I find that or locate that, and then what do I do with it? And it's just really clear to me, like, it's just how much I was kind of socialized into this one note, um, of emoting, you know, being angry. And it's like, that's where you can be passionate, you know, that's where you can really express your emotion and not be like stone faced and stoic. So even if you're not actually angry, You might be sad, you might be grieving, you might, whatever it might be. It comes out as this sort of, lashing out. And it's funny, it's so deeply programmed. It's like, even as I have spent years trying to kind of decode it, it's just keeps coming back for me.
Something that kind of came up for me when you were talking, saying was kind of related to this idea of like, we are the byproduct of like, the trauma or violence or institutional harm and norms of our larger world. And I do feel like that just undermines the opportunity of empathy and respect for other people. And so if we don't have empathy or respect or a desire to be in community with other people, I think that's like certainly underlying pieces that really speak back to like white supremacy and transphobia and so many other pieces, right? Because I think when we're talking about gender, like so many people want just to put people in boxes because it's too uncomfortable to like have a true spectrum of gender, how people want to identify any way that they want. And I just think us as human beings being the byproduct of all these harmful experiences, institutional forms of oppression, it really just eliminates ways that we can have empathy and respect for one another.
I just appreciate the thoughts that were just shared and just the vulnerability. Sean, thank you for like just sharing your experiences around what your experience around anger has been like. I certainly resonate with it. I'm still very much to this day dealing with how I hold anger, and at the core of it, just like grief and hurt. Because I think that's where a lot of, at least my anger and anger in my family and community comes from. Um, and I definitely agree that there's so much of it that is derived from like these systems of oppressions that have impacted our livelihoods as a people, as our individual selves, that these macro systems have really trickled down into our everyday lives, and strained some of our ways that we build relationship with each other. And speaking from a second generation Hmong American that was raised in a household that was a working middle class household, maybe not having the most access to resources like therapy or like getting counseling, even in our our clan systems to have mediation that actually offer holistic healing. It's it sure as hell makes motherfuckers mad. Like I think there is so much to be angry about in this world, and it's okay. And I think the real question comes in about how do we transmute this anger? How do we alchemize it to transform lives for the better in our own daily lives, personal lives, and then also when we bring those things back into our communities, and start to declare that these systems that have taught us of how to interact in very much violent, apathetic, um, capitalistic ways, they just no longer serve us. Our world is dying. We are dying. And we have to really put into questions about what is it that we're really living out and the future we're creating that's sustainable for us. And I think we're in a special time, especially since this pandemic started a couple years ago. And I just apologize for swearing. I don't know if we're allowed to swear earlier. It's the thought random across my head. I think this pandemic has really put into question and really put into people's faces just how devastated of a world we're living in, and in particular the context of the U.S. And how much our systems have you can either take a look at it as they have failed us, or if they have actually accomplished the mission to really create scarcity in resources, create a scarcity in mindsets, especially in communities of color, Black, Indigenous people of color communities, queer and trans communities, folks with disabilities, to feel like that there is just not enough, and that we are not enough. And when I think those of us who are able to um, start to create the tools or acquire the tools and means to work through those means, and find a collective of people, because you cannot do this all by yourself. It is our duty to bring these things back to our folks, let them know that there can be change that is happening, that can happen. And I think it's really important of just the message around hope for the work that we do, because I think we're working with so many people that are out of hope or at the very last straw of their lives, just because there have been so many systems that have turned them away, so many other people who are dealing with their own ish that turn them away. And so um, these are the thoughts that are coming about when I'm hearing this conversation as we're going through it.
Yeah, I'm definitely appreciating what's coming up here today. So thank you all for contributing to that. Um, I think hope is always something that I tend to struggle with myself personally. Like I have really good days and good weeks where it's like, okay, there's hope. We are making change. We are slowly learning how to connect into community and to support and care for one another. All of these ways of being that then like violence doesn't have to happen, right? You talked about scarcity, and like when we are connected into community, we do have the things that we need. We know from the work that we do that violence is much less prevalent because folks are taken care of, and they have spaces to work on their healing. And so I'm curious, saying, I know you talked a little bit about some of the work at Transforming Generations, but I'm curious, what does healing look like, and how do you teach or show or guide, model to folks like when they've experienced that harm? Like, how does healing look? I'm guessing you would say there's probably not one way, right, to heal, but I would be curious to learn more about that.
Yeah, thank you for such a thoughtful and important question. With our work at Transform Generations, I think one of our values is like healing justice, transformative justice, and offering people the opportunity to really look into the the patterns and the landscape of their life, um, especially those who have been um, faced with a lot of violence. And sometimes when those things occur, people can either internalize the violence being their fault, or that they also perpetuate violence in their own right. Um, and so we we have to, I think, give people an opportunity to really have their basic needs met first, especially considering our survivors and victims of this form of violence. That it can get to a place that their physiological needs, that their brain can actually process in safe environments, that they are being um, held with care, um, to start the process then of what are the patterns that are existing in our personal lives that um, maybe could be better and healthier choices, and then also start to examine the systems that are around that perpetuate these violences. Um, I think it's super important to bring consciousness to our people, that we can give the tools to that, so that there is, you know, move towards resiliency and self-sufficiency, and then also collectivity, where they bring these things back to their own homes, their own children, their own communities. And so I think so much that we have to give people the opportunity to change, and as well for people who've caused harm to be given the same and held accountable for how they have perpetuated harm. How will they not only just apologize, but better move forward to mend relationships, mend the lives that they have harmed, and then also reconcile with themselves of the actual psychological, physiological damage that they've done to themselves. And so I'm thinking also about when it comes to our queer and trans folks, it's really important for their existence, for their whole selves to be validated, to be affirmed. I think being in a community that is still having tremendous amounts of grappling of what is queer identity, what is trans identity, even though we've always been around, be it we may have been erased in our histories, people are just starting to like come to terms of what is queerness, what is transness, and for the folks who are those existences, it's I think so crucial to just be able to see themselves. Thankfully, at myself and other staff here, we reflect that experience. We understand some of those hardships, and we are so happy to offer affirmations and love onto queer and trans folks that are seeking safe hold, that are seeking a hub to come together to connect with other queer and trans folks. And really, I think it's important that when it comes to healing, know that it's so tied to community as much as it is to our individual journeys. Like, I think in decolonizing our way of looking at what that process looks like, our connection to each other is so deeply and so fundamentally part of being Hmong. As we've relied on each other, we have sought to stand through the test of times when being persecuted throughout our history, to lean on each other. And in this landscape of the U.S., we are just figuring those things out now. And it's I think more than 50 years here that we are still picking up those pieces. And be it assimilation, mass culture, or popular culture may tell us that our individual self can get us in through our lives, that we can heal ourselves, that we don't need anyone else. And I think it's such a disservice to really say that sort of messaging to our folks, because, and to anybody for that matter, that there's such a need for a community, for connectivity and collectivity to occur, as I think so much of our pain comes, our hurts, our traumas come from relationships, that it's going to take relationships as well to heal, to mend, to really move forward in good faith. And so, our program is sort of reflective of like all these kind of layers of like values and philosophies that we hold, that we try to meet people's basic needs, help them acquire those resources that we aren't able to provide, provide the emotional support, the mental support to process through what is going on in the face of violence, in the face of trauma, and give people the tools to really start to question, critique the things that have been status quo, so that it is the spiral of creating holistic healing, of being better persons, better community members, better family members, and hopefully, when our time is no longer here, better ancestors for those to come in to continue to create these cycles where we're not having to face so much violence in our lives.
think I'm just processing all those incredible pieces of information you bestowed upon us, saying, yeah, honestly, that was incredible. So thank you for all the perspective that you just brought into this. And some of the things that really resonated with me is, not defining ourselves as individuals by the single worst thing that we've ever done, and ensuring that we can all create change within ourselves to better impact ourselves and thus our wider community, and at the same time have that compassionate accountability to either the harm that was done or the work that needs to continue and be improved upon as well. So I think that piece is still just as important throughout these conversations. And something that I've been keeping in mind is some additional words of wisdom by some activists that I try to follow and be connected with. And hopefully I'm saying their name correctly, but Alok Vade Manan. And Alok often talks about this phrase that I've heard from them like multiple times over and over, like compassion without comprehension. And I think this comprehension piece is we don't have to, again, fit people into certain boxes or to utilize like powerful institutional structures like science to tell us like a very academic form of what to be and how we're supposed to act, right? It's really just focusing on this compassion for one another, that we can be connected. And I think what you talked about at the very start, saying like ensuring that folks have their basic needs being met, and then to like bring in that collective consciousness together as well.
Yeah, I definitely can agree, Hunter. Just kind of sitting and processing, and I think my tendency is to like, quick, someone say something, and also that's part of these conversations, right? This is what we're trying to model. Is like none of us have a script, none of us have, the right answers all the time. I think so. Just processing that and. I really like what you said there, Hunter, and bringing in a look. Love that. And definitely follow their work and encourage all of y'all who are watching to check them out as well. And that feels like a good transition into talking a little bit about Trans Day of Remembrance. See what I did there with the transition. And so this is, that's right. But I just, this is a tough day that comes up. I mean, I think in my brain, it's like this holiday or this day. And as peacemakers, we have this day off actually, which is a really big blessing, for those of us who are trans and gender expansive folks, to just be able to take care of ourselves on this day, which is coming up on Monday, the 20th. And I just want to, open that up for you, saying like, for those who don't know, would you talk a little bit more about the importance of this day, and then maybe share a little bit about if there are nuances within the Hmong community about how trans and queer folks spend time on this day, or what the focus is on, healing or remembrance, or resilience is also another thing I hear from folks around this day. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that to the space, and just folks whose lives been impacted into that sort of like space with us, who are no longer here, as we remember them with Trans Day of Remembrance. I had to do a little bit of research. It's been a minute since I've kind of taken a look at where did this day come from, and I was finding that it started back in 1998, November of that year, to honor an individual by the name of Rita Hester, who was murdered in San Francisco for being a trans person. And I think it is really important to take a look at the history and why these things occur, and not not honor the sacrifices, the reason why we are doing these sort of things. Um, I think back to just like the phenomenon of pride, what we have today as a celebratory thing, and it's really lively. It's really vibrant. It can be like people's ways to like celebrate and be in community, and it's super important, especially for queer and trans folks. Um, and also to remember the history it came from. That it started off as a riot in New York, where I forgot the year, somewhere in the 1960s. There were trans women of color, there were queer folks of color that were tired of being abused by the state's violence, through policing, through means of surveillance, questioning people's existence, and criminalizing their existence. Where at this bar called Stonewall, um, a couple of figures that you all should know: Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, um, Miss Major C. Griffin. These are folks that decided to, literally throw a stone and throw some stuff at the violence being faced from police that were coming into these gay bars and questioning their place and their reason for being just simply here. And so I say those things to say that with Trans Day of Remembrance coming up, a couple of things. There are still so many murders being happening with trans people just in this country alone. I don't even know the number this year. I know that it's way more than needed, if ever. Like it shouldn't even be happening. Um, and people who are trans are still continually being persecuted, being gawked at, being ostracized, and just like having their existence be impeded on, to be devalued and erased. Um, and some of the most ultimate acts of it, control over it, is like murder. Um, and so this day is to remember the folks who have been taken away way too soon, just because of the bigotry and the lies around their personhoods not being enough or not validated or um, being honored, really. And so we honor and remember those folks, that they were cared for, that their life existed beyond just the act that was faced with them, and that with their beautiful existence as being trans, that they were a full human too, that they had joys and dreams, and they've contributed so much to our story about who we are as a people. I think um, so much to like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, that they show so much of entire generations of who grew up in the U.S. and are learning about these histories, such as I did several years ago. That we are part of history. We are part of indigeneity. We are part of like our community as humanity was brought about. I think colonialism has really taught us to only know that there's only two genders, and for many cultures that is not the case. And I got a chance to take some initiative to study some things throughout Southeast Asia about what was um, what were systems around gender that existed before colonialism reached areas of Southeast Asia. And there was so much fascinating things about um, three genders, more genders than just two existing, and actually being revered as like people who were in tune spiritually, or just in tune in general, with folks who had this greater understanding about the importance of both masculinity and femininity and the divinity of it all. And for some who were a blend of both, that people respected and came forward to get counsel for, to have really important decision-making matters in their villages, in their communities. And so um, with this day, I think about all of these things, about the people who have created the waves of queer and trans people to be able to exist and continue to do this work, to offer more room for queer and trans people to feel validated and affirmed, and to get the tools that they need to be empowered and seen. I agree for people who have been taken so far too soon. And I know in the Hmong community that we've had a couple of people who have taken their own lives just because they felt like their gender, their expression as queer and trans folks, there just wasn't a place for that in their worlds and their families. And so we actually also take this day off at Transforming Generations to recognize it, to really build out in the ways that we're thinking about liberation, how is it inclusive for queer and trans folks, queer and trans Hmong people, because we know that our community is also being very much impacted by that in real time, and how white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism is very much one of the direct sources of why we have transphobia and homophobia so rampant in our communities. It's not because we're inherently homophobic or transphobic. You know, we have so much violence historically and to this day that we're facing, that we have people who still think and perpetuate in this ignorance to think that our existence as trans, our queer people, as gender variant people, it doesn't mean much, but it means so much. We are bearers of culture ourselves. And so yeah, these are just like the things that I run through my mind when this day is coming up soon, and how it's a part of the holidays that at Transforming Generations we want to recognize and really honor.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for sharing that. I think so many of us don't actually know histories of queer and especially trans folks, and especially when it comes to different cultures and communities. I think there's just an expansive amount of us all over and throughout history. Like I think you said earlier, we've been here all along. And so, you know, I know when I think about this day, I was thinking, you know, there's also folks who want to lift up those who we've lost or who have died by suicide as well, just due to it's a hard world. It's a hard community to live in when you, as you said, like are not seen, are not valued the same as anyone else. And so I know for us, you know, here in our community, we typically host like a vigil of some kind to honor. But then also in the last couple of years, it really became clear to us that we didn't want to only have that as what was, you know, offered in community. We need to be thinking about healing. We need to be thinking about care and collective care at that. So, you know, part of our gatherings and events that we plan always sort of incorporate food and art and just different types of healing practices. I think this year our planning team has someone coming to do some yoga, so some of that body work, right, to help folks either learn some new practices that may help them right in their day-to-day, or just in that time, like on the day itself when it is so kind of in our face the amount of violence that our community faces. And I want to just highlight, that our Black and brown, trans, and gender expansive folks face even higher, numbers of violence. And so I think I need to sit with, and all of us, right, need to sit with the fact that, as you said, saying like the impact of white supremacy and patriarchy and how those just allow all of these other isms and phobias really to flourish in our communities. And yet, when I think about my trans and gender nonconforming siblings and relatives and community, I just think of the amazing, beautiful expansiveness that we bring and offer to our larger community, right? Having these different experiences of gender, having both, or a little bit of everything, or not at all identifying with gender, how we know it. So, yeah, it's, I think it typically falls on us as trans and gender nonconforming folks to kind of lead these conversations. But I would also love to hear from Sean and Hunter things that are coming up. And I know our time is running short here, so if either of you have anything to add, we'd love to hear.
I'm struck by something that Seng said about, connecting to what Seng said about, kind of our world is dying, not like the world is dying, but, the world of capitalism and the structures that are built into that, the structures of oppression and exploitation, and those structures are falling apart as capitalism reaches its kind of terminal end. If you're a Marxist like me, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is starting to get to the point where, maybe we will see some kind of revolution in our lifetimes. Not saying it has to be a communist one, but that's where I'll be. You can find me over in that line. But what's really interesting to me is this idea of reconnecting to the historical conceptions of gender, like going back before colonization. There has always been much more expansive, generative, generous conceptions of what gender means. And I think we've been living in kind of a dark ages where there's been so much repression of these things. And there's so much pressure to maintain these structures of colonization and exploitation and oppression, where people have been forced to go underground. And there are all kinds of repercussions of that, violence and suicide and all those really difficult things that are really important to acknowledge and remember. But I just feel like we're really witnessing a paradigm shift. And I don't know. I just think things are changing and a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. But I think there's just a lot of energy moving in that direction. And I think it's part of a larger shift. So I see a lot of promise in that.
Thank you, Sean. Something that I just popped up into my head during this conversation is Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk about the danger of a single story. And I think based on what you were and all of us have been touching on, like colonization and institutional harm, about just framing an entire community through a very deficit-focused perspective. And I think when we're talking about trans folks and gender fluid and gender queer folks, like mainstream society just focusing on trans folks from a deficit perspective, which is just so harmful, knowing that there is such rich history and culture. And so I think it's uplifting this both and of having this time of support and community healing on being aware of the harm, murder, transphobia that happens. And so holding that in one hand and at the same time being able to celebrate that rich diversity in the spectrum of amazing work in humanity that folks can collectively bring together. And that is always there, but that's not what larger society sees so often. And so how can we all take a step into like holding both of those pieces at the same time in remembering the history and the harm, and at the same time being able to create internal and communal change and supporting and having empathy and respect for everyone as well.
Yeah, I would love to so much add on to that. I think thank you for bringing that sort of concept of like really holding people with these multifacetedness of like when we think about marginalized communities, there's so much thought about like how poor, how devastated, how like much we aren't capable. And I think for trans people, and specifically trans Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks, there's so much beauty and magic in there. And I think in our line of work, really trying to, in really simple and also really deep ways, reframe the idea that our transness, our queerness, it's not a detriment to us at all. It's not a deficit about our personhood. If anything, it is magical. It is feeding the ideas about what freedom looks like. It is giving our permissions to be our whole, full selves. And, you know, I think when people who are cisgender, who are not queer, are faced with that, it's scary. It is uncomfortable. It is a violation of the status quo that people are not questioning dearly enough, that they resort to these really violating and violent responses to our communities. And so I think it relates so closely to our work in addressing gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, because we need to love on trans people more. We need to love on queer people more. Even especially when the state doesn't, with all of these legislations trying to be passed to not make it okay to be trans. Community at the end of the day have each other, and I think there's so much grassroots, there's so much organizing being done to address these things in the state, and then in our practices as people and community, it's our duty to also hold special and sacred trans folks in our lives, and for those of us who are trans too, to guide and to hold accountable our own folks too. I think there's so much people growing and finding out who they are too, that there can be something gentle and very special to offer siblinghood, kinship, and camaraderie for queer and trans people who know the experience and need to foster more caring environments that are not exploitive, that are not predatory, and that lead to more holistic sense of selves. So yeah, I just offer that can we remember the folks that are taken away too soon, beyond just Trans Day of Remembrance on the 20th, and love on folks to explore, to not be so scared, to be curious about how we can better get to know queer and trans people of our lives and honor them as their full selves.
I feel like that's a mic drop right there. I just appreciate all of what you shared there, Seng. And yeah, it makes me feel a little emotional. And I know our siblings all, you know, there's a lot of emotions as this day approaches. And so the reminder that we are magical, that we are helping cis and hetero folks really learn how y'all can also expand into, you know, your full selves without having to feel like you fit into this box that society has created for us. Like, this is our life, and we actually get to experience our wholeness. And when we get to do that in community, I think that's that's the way, that's, you know, this is the way, this is what we are all working towards together. So just wanting to thank you, Seng, so much for your generosity and for spending time with us here today at the kitchen table for our 66th live kitchen table conversation. We're just very glad that you could join us. And for those of you who have been able to tune in live, thank you so much for your time and generosity of your time. And we want to encourage all of y'all to have a conversation about this, about Trans Day of Remembrance, about the trans and queer folks in your lives, and think about what are some ways you could lift us up, lift those folks up in your lives, share some extra care in the coming days, as this is a hard day where a lot of us are grieving. So we all need each other, and we can all take a little extra time to share that care with folks. So thank you again to Seng. Thank you to our regulars, Hunter and Sean, for everything you added to our conversation. And thank you again to all of you who have joined us today. As a reminder, we are hosting these live conversations every other Thursday, about twice a month at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we would invite you to join us for our next one, which will be on the 30th of November. And we will be chatting about gratitude and how that shows up in our lives, especially as we have Thanksgiving coming up and the holidays. There's so many that come up, and a lot of what we do, right, is think about gratitude. And so we hope you'll join us for that as well. So don't forget, you can like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all of these conversations. And if you miss them, you can find all of our 66 previous conversations online as well. And as always, we just hope that all of you take good care. Until next time, and see you back at the kitchen table. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much all for having me in. Ochana, I really appreciate having shared this space together.
Thanks, y'all.